I'm Matt.
I'm Carrie.
We are the Stagmer Brothers of Baltimore Knife and Sword. We're going to be building some of your favorite weapons, and some weapons that you've never seen before.
This is Man-at-Arms, Reforged. It's been quite a while now since we made the Warhammer 40K chainsword for you, but we're still seeing a fair number of requests for something from Warhammer. So we're going to go back and pick out what we think is the most iconic weapon from the entire series. We're going to make the Hammer of Sigmar. There really is no other thing that's quite as iconic as something that's right on the front cover of the books. We're going to be forging and cutting, plasma cutting, lathe work, casting. Pretty much everything that we do in the entire shop will come together to create this weapon. No matter how we build this, it's going to be extremely heavy. So we have to think about what we can do to create this and still be able to show you really good demo work with it. So as we go through, some of these pieces will be solid, some will be fabricated. Then we'll be able to take this, finish it out, get that brass golden surface over the entire piece, and take it out and do some damage. Using the immense power of the Nazel 2B, Ilya now upsets or drives the bar down on itself. This is a 3-inch piece of round we start with, but we need a 4-inch square. So creating this form is the first step of creating the entire section. Once he's got that large square, he's able to draw out the point and then form it down. We'll be doing some grinding and fitting on this to finish it out. I'm beginning to work on the ornamentation for Sigmar's hammer. We've got a skull on the side of the piece. Rick's going to be sculpting that for us. We'll cast it in bronze. But to hold it in place, we have a bezel that's multiple stages. Kind of looks like the front of a camera almost. And so I'm going to cut a series of rings. We'll take each one of those rings and ornament them. They'll be stacked, welded together, and that'll become the bezel that holds the skull. And then everything will be brass to turn it gold. Using a large concave form sitting on the anvil, Billy and Matt are able to drive the center section down and begin to put the curve in the spike that we'll need. As long as they get it close, we'll be able to grind it to form. But if it was just straight and we wanted to get that curve, we'd have a huge amount of material to remove. They're going to make this job much easier.
All right, here I have 2 of the bezels for Sigmar's hammer. I'm going to go in with our knife wheel, take the smaller ring, put a couple flutes on here, then I'm going to flute the larger ring. It's going to make it look like a ribbon so we can move on to the next phase of the build.
This particular weapon has a lot of adornment, particularly where the bezels fit to either side of the Warhammer. In the very center of this piece is a skull, and then there's several smaller appliques which go around the outside edges. I'm going to use polymer clay, and I only need to create one, because in the casting process we can duplicate as many as we need. Now I'm going to make one skull out of polymer clay that we'll later make a mold of, and then we can cast 2 when we go to attach them to the Warhammer.
All right, you can see that Ilya's forged the rough shape of our back spike. It was actually pretty impressive how we did that. It's now time to move to the grinder. I have to true up all 4 sides, make them nice and flat so we can weld on the other pieces. And then obviously, gotta sharpen our point.
For our Sigmar's hammer, the next step in the process is to go ahead and cut the face of the hammer on our CNC system here. We're going to cut that out of some 1/4-inch alloy. We'll clean it up and then build the box around it.
So you saw the die that I created using the CNC mill. Here it is. It's a relatively thin piece of material. If I was going to make this for high production, I would have used a much larger piece of steel just so it had a bigger backing. But it'll work just fine for now. We're going to be creating those rosettes in brass. They'll be pressed into the cavity so that that pressure can be applied through the press. We'll be using a block of lead, and that's going to conform to this shape with the brass in between, pressing it in, giving us our final piece. We'll be using 80 tons of pressure, and that's not going to hurt either. Even though this hydraulic press moves fairly slow, it's very powerful and can be a very dangerous machine. Anything between those 2 plates will be crushed. That's the reason we have 2 palm controls, so that we have to have each of our hands out of the way. Sometimes you'll see a foot control on this, but you have to be extremely careful. We're going to be using this system the way it's set up, nice and safe, keeping your hands out of the way.
Okay, I'm starting to assemble the hammer face for Sigmar's hammer here. You'll see where I've tack welded my side plates to the front. Next step is to weld the corners and edges.
I'll be turning the upper handle segment for Sigmar's hammer. In this case, I'll be using an alloy of steel called 12L14. It's also referred to as free machining steel, which means that it's very easy to cut.
So here I have the face for a Warhammer. John's already gone and welded up all the sides on it. I'm going to clean up all the welds and get it ready for the next process.
We now use the South Bend lathe to create the final form for the pommel. Using a torch and a solid brass wire wheel, Bill and John begin to brass these bezel sections. Once they're completely covered, we'll be able to assemble these pieces and then set the skulls in the center. It'll all come together and be the final ornamentation on this hammer. So I've been working from a series of pieces that were sculpted. The pieces that you saw Rick working on, the skull and the side piece for the cross that goes on the side of the hammer. And we also have a skull for the bottom flange that goes on the bottom of the hammer handle. Now this skull, Ferenc actually originally carved, and he had a metal one here, and I made a vulcanized mold, which is where we take a rubber that has to be under temperature and pressure. So we have a press, we press it. This material runs about 325 degrees to get hard. And that allows us to create this mold that the wax injector uses. It shoots wax right in. We get more skulls, Ferenc puts them together. The pieces that you saw Rick sculpt, I just made a quick open face mold where I could just pour right from the top. So I'm just pouring molten wax right into it so that as we need to, we could just pour wax, pick up another master. We're gonna encase it in investment. It's basically like a plaster around the outside. We'll burn it out in the kiln. That'll leave a cavity. We'll fill that with bronze, and then the bronze will get mounted on the hammer.
The next step in the assembly of our Sigmar's Warhammer is to figure out the actual sides of the hammerhead itself. I went ahead and did some full-size sketches here of what I think it should look like. We have the face of the hammer with the sides already attached. This will serve as a central box, like a core, if you will. Now what I need to do is to get the sides curved to come from the edges up into these cutouts, all 4 directions, and then 4 more on the corners. I went ahead and guessed at a shape and some dimensions. Now we need to clean these up, give it some decorative work before we can shape them. The real trick is going to be shaping 2 by hand to be identical. Then I can figure out the top and bottom, get those situated, and then we'll do the 4 corners.
So for Sigmar's hammer, I have our spike and our box. Now Matt's already gone through, roughed this out. Now I'm gonna go through, finish the final grit. So once this is done, we can give it to John, and he's gonna weld it onto our box like so.
Now we have the waxes sprued up, or treed up, as we'd say. We've got the skull set on here. This is our base. We're gonna be taking a metal flask, slip it over the top. I'll be pouring investment in here, which is essentially plaster with silica added. It allows it to handle high temperature. We're gonna be firing at 1350 degrees. Perforated holes in the flask to allow the vacuum air to be drawn through when we put it in the casting machine, but we've got them taped up so that when we pour the investment around this piece, it doesn't just flow out all over the place. We'll go to the vacuum machine, get all those air bubbles out, and then once it sets up, it'll go in the kiln, melt out, we'll fill that cavity with bronze.
All right, I've already gone through on our Warhammer and engraved the knotwork that's on the haft itself. Now I'm gonna go in with my file, clean up my line work, and just make it a little deeper. Once I'm done with that, I'm gonna take another chisel and basically stipple the background.
Now that the wax has been melted out after the flask has been fired, I'm going to be pouring in bronze. The bronze will fill the cavity. We're going to wait for it to cool off, then it'll be quenched in water, and we'll be able to remove the finished piece.
Perhaps the most difficult part of sheet metal forming in this entire build are these quarter panels. John's really had to take his time and figure it out. Now that there's a shape, it's time to weld them on. To create the roping sections for our hammer, which is basically going to go in every seam along the entire surface of our hammer, there are a number of ways of doing it. You could take two pieces of wire, twist them, you could hot twist a piece of square stock. To get the look exactly how we need it, I'm going to have to do it the hard way. And that is just taking this round rod and very slowly rotating it, grinding a spiral along the entire surface. Probably going to need about 18 to 25 feet of this. So I've cut little rod sections up. Let's get to grinding.
Using the same piece of bronze material that I turned the bottom pommel from, I'm going to be turning a top spike. I have the automatic feed on the lathe set, but I'll in-feed and create the form manually. Now that Bill has masked off certain areas to keep them bright, he's going to be using a chemical blackening. That's going to give us 3 different colors: the black, the silver, and the gold. This was our second Warhammer build, and like the first build, while I was excited when we began, I was really excited when I saw it at the end. I'm very, very happy with the work that was done by the team on this, and I think this is a fantastic weapon.
Click here to subscribe, or click here to watch more episodes. Thanks for watching Man-at-Arms Reforged. We need to know what you want the guys to build, so tell us in the comments below what weapons you want to see next.